Hello everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the Holland Land Office Museum's Artifact video series. My name is Ryan Duffy and I'm the director of the museum. In this week's topic, we are going to discuss probably the preeminent educator in Batavia's history, and that is John Kennedy. Now, John Kennedy was actually born in England on September 17th, 1846. He actually had 14 brothers and sisters. Though this was a family very dedicated to education, as apparently 9 of his siblings also went into education. Most of the children actually became educators. When John was a young boy, his father actually left England and traveled to the United States looking for work on some of the major construction projects that were going on in the country at the time. And this actually left his mother alone with quite a few of the children and having to sort of fend for herself. Some time went by without any word from John's father, and his mother decided that she would pack up the children and head off to the United States to sort of follow it along and hopefully reunite. So she packed up the 5 boys that were the children at the time and actually moved to Greeley, Iowa, where her brother had settled previously, and they lived on the farmstead there. Now eventually his father was able to meet up with the family again and came to the farmstead in Iowa and reunited with his mother, and many more children were born there in Iowa. Now, John Kennedy actually served in the Civil War from a unit out in Iowa. We're not sure exactly on his record during the war, but after the war he got right into education. And not too long after the war, he was actually hired as the superintendent of one of the local districts around Greeley, Iowa, and this was sort of the start of his education career. His time in New York State actually begins in the summer of 1878 when he was asked to conduct a Teachers Institute in Greene County, New York. The program was so successful and so popular that he was actually asked to do it again in the winter of that year for 45 more teachers who were actually required to pay in tuition to come. It was this success that actually brought him to Batavia, as in 1890 the village school district reached out to him to become the superintendent of their school. He accepted the position and actually would stay there for 23 years until 1913. Kennedy actually put Batavia on the map, as the education system that he created was so well received that it became known as the Batavia System and would be then copied throughout the country. Now, the Batavia System was a system meant to encourage and incentivize children to reach higher goals and almost educate themselves in many ways. And its popularity was so well known that many teachers came to Batavia just to witness it and take it back to their own districts to spread it even further. Kennedy would say of his Batavia system that it was meant more to encourage than to help. It was meant to give the children encouragement to succeed, to achieve, and excel more than to necessarily just assist them to reach whatever mid-level goal that was set forth. Now, this was not meant for individual instruction, though. It was meant to be in a general classroom setting where teachers still taught large classes that were of a mixture of students, but they usually had a second aide, you might call them, or teacher personnel that was in the classroom, sort of watching the students individually and seeing how they accepted the teaching and how they were progressing in their studies and what goals they were reaching. And this system was meant to encourage all students and not just focus on students that were either excelling particularly or were not excelling and maybe falling behind. And many of the methods within the Batavia system have continued on to modern education though, particularly the concept of a teacher's aide and also the incentive method. What I have here is actually a copy of Kennedy's memoirs on his Batavia education system. This was written in 1914, so the year after he retired as superintendent. And in his introduction, he lists sort of the 6 tenets of the system, so I'd just like to share those with you briefly. The first tenet is that the Batavia system is a system of individual instruction, but substituting for occasional haphazard personal teaching that's often associated with after-hours teaching, when both the teacher and the student are not at their peak in terms of learning or teaching. So the system instead had its regular time and place to take out these uncertainties where the students could be focused on by the teacher. So it's individual instruction without taking it outside of the regular classroom hours. The second, its foundation principle is not to tell, but to lead the pupil to find out for themselves. Instead of robbing the pupil of the joy of achievement by seeking to find for him a royal road to knowledge, it glorifies the achievement and the joy of it, and inspires a love and a habit of it. So this is more of showing instead of telling. Instead of giving all the answers, basically trying to show the pathway and letting the student take it for themselves and basically relish in the achievement of reaching a goal and learning something on their own. Third, it is not a device for helping backward pupils. It helps them, but it helps bright pupils too, and there is no recognition of backward pupils. Every pupil in the school is benefited. So it is very egalitarian concept that everybody's going to be treated the same, and the system does help everybody in the same way. It is not designed to specialize in those either extremely bright or those that maybe need help catching up. Number 4, it is not a foe to the graded system. On the contrary, nowhere are the advantages and the necessity of the class more convincingly demonstrated than in this book. It sustains the graded system by supplementing it. So in his system, it's not taking away the importance of grades. It just uses them as another benchmark. 5, it is not a way to get extra labor from the teacher. On the contrary, it lightens her work and relieves her of anxiety. So at least in his mind, it was taking some stress away from the teacher as in putting more onus on the student themselves to do a lot of the work. And lastly, it is not an excuse to add expense. On the contrary, it lightens it, producing more results at less cost. Now in Batavia, Mr. Kennedy was not just known as the superintendent. He also had a major impact in other areas in the town, and particularly dealing with the Holland Land Office building in which the museum today is housed. While he was superintendent, word spread very quickly that in the early 1890s that the building that housed the Holland Land Office was in danger of being torn down as it had fallen into much disrepair. And Kennedy was a lover of history and recognized the importance of the building and was one of the spearheads in driving the community effort in order to save the building. He wrote many articles in the Daily News about the importance of the building, and this actually led him to write a full-length manuscript on the connection of the building and Robert Morris, the manuscript being called Robert Morris and the Holland Land Office, creating that connection to a national figure with the building to help raise awareness about it and its importance to both the local community and those outside. He also championed it with other local organizations. He was a member of the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic, of the Upton Post here in Batavia. So he went to his friends there in the organization and asked them to assist in the funds and the fundraising to help buy the building and save it. And he also, while superintendent, took the matter to his students and the parents of his students to help raise additional funds. And it was actually the senior class of 1894, the Batavia High School, which raised the down payment for them to be able to buy the building and pay off the mortgage. And then from there, additional funds were raised in order to completely buy out the building. So it was actually local students who were influential in saving the building here, thanks to John Kennedy's leadership. Kennedy's love of education, and particularly the art of spelling, did not cease after he retired as superintendent, and he actually went on to write 3 books about spelling and sort of language in general. He wrote 2 volumes of What Words Say, and then he also wrote another one called The Step Dictionary. But he also wrote other books about language during the time, as he seemed to be a prolific writer. And most of these were centered around the concepts of education and the importance of it in the modern community of the early 20th century. These included The School and Family, Individual Instruction, Philosophy of School Instruction, and maybe my favorite title is Should Greek Go?, about students should still be learning Greek in school. After he retired as Batavia Superintendent in 1913, he actually moved back out to Iowa to live with his sister, and he would stay there for the rest of his life, and he would actually pass away in 1927 after being in poor health for some time. Now, his name still lives on here in Batavia, as one of the elementary schools was actually named after him, John Kennedy School. And Batavia might be the only place that has a John Kennedy School not named after the former president, John F. Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy is one of the most influential figures, at least in the turn of the century Batavia, as his impact, particularly on education, cannot be questioned, but he also was a champion for local causes, including saving the building here to make it into a museum. So we really owe him a debt of gratitude for his time here in Batavia. So I hope you enjoyed this edition of our Artifact video series and learning a little bit more about John Kennedy. So if you have missed any in the past, feel free to go check them out on our YouTube channel, Holland Land Office Museum. And if you've enjoyed these, we'll keep doing them going into the future, keep them coming out every week. And if you'd like to learn any more about any of the artifacts that we've discussed here or the stories, feel free to stop on by the museum. We'll be happy to give you that information.